I'm Jeff Fritz with SoundStage.com, and I'm joined today by Enno Vandermeer. He is the CEO and founder of Roon Labs. Enno, how are you today?
Great, thanks. Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Well, it's my pleasure to have you here, and I wanted to jump right in and talk a little bit about Roon. I think most audiophiles that stream music these days, they know what Roon is, but let's just assume for a minute that we've got some viewers out there that don't know Roon and what Roon Labs has created. Give us a short tutorial on exactly what Roon is for those folks.
Okay. Roon is a software music player that really it has sort of three pillars. The first is it's a user experience for browsing and exploring music. It's very rich and it uses a lot of enhanced metadata. So instead of just showing you the very basic information about the music you're browsing, it'll show you artist biographies and high-res photos and album art and credits from the liner notes. In fact, that's kind of the experience that it tries to reproduce, is browsing the liner notes of an album as you listen. So that's the user experience side of things. The next thing that it does is it is a music player, but it works with basically any audio hardware out there. So whether you've got something that uses AirPlay or Chromecast or a protocol like that, or you have one of our Roon Ready devices. There are I think over 200 brands now manufacturing Roon Ready devices. The idea is that Roon lets you browse your music, and then you can play it back on anything that you have in the house. That's the objective.
Okay.
So Roon is software, but it works with basically any hardware that's out there. And then the third area of focus is sound quality. So from its foundation, Roon is built to provide the best possible sound quality, and really to be limited only by the hardware that you use it with. So if you have a DAC that's capable of doing 384 kilohertz and 32-bit, Roon can support that. But likewise, if you have a device that's not as capable, like an AirPlay radio, for example, that's limited to 44.1 kilohertz and 16-bit, Roon can transcode your content and play it in an appropriate format to that device. So it's the optimal sound quality from every device you use it with.
Okay, that sounds good, and that's it's a short explanation of something that is very rich and complex and has tons of features. And let's get into that a little bit. When Roon was launched, I think if I'm not mistaken, it was 2015 when the software was actually launched. Let's say that you had a user in 2016, for instance, and they experimented with Roon and then they went on to something else, and now they're thinking about coming back to Roon. If they were to jump into Roon now, what would they see differently? What features would be different than back at its initial launch?
That's a great question. So much has changed in a number of different areas. To begin with, the roots of the product come from our previous product called Sulus, which was really a music player for CD libraries. So you'd rip your CDs and play them back, because that was that's what people did back then. Roon we launched it right around the time that streaming was really beginning to come into its own. Tidal had just launched with lossless streaming. So the idea of audiophiles listening to streaming content was just kind of coming into its own. So most of our early Roon users just had their own files on a NAS or on a hard drive, for example. That's kind of the world they'd come from. And maybe they experimented with streaming on their phone, but it wasn't really part of their critical listening or their audiophile setup. So we came in really kind of catering to that user primarily. We had our Tidal integration at launch, but over time, what we've been able to do with streaming has just far outpaced what we would have been able to do with just the files that you have. For example, let's say you have 3 albums by an artist, but we can't recommend their latest one because you don't have that. You never bought that CD. You never ripped it. By adding the streaming kind of dimension and allowing you to log into your streaming service through Roon, now we can show you anything that's available in the world. So I think the main theme of what's changed in the user interface is that we can do a lot more with discovery and recommendation than we ever could in the past. In the past, we were limited kind of by what you owned already. And now we can say, well, okay, now we know what you like because we can see what's in your library. And based on that, we can make some really, really intelligent recommendations for more music to explore. And I think the reason this has been such an area of focus for us is that if you open up a streaming service app, what you'll typically find is that there's so much choice. There's 60 million tracks to choose from, and frankly, that's a daunting experience for most
Yeah.
people, particularly for music fans who are quite sensitive about what they like and don't like. So by using your own library as the starting point, Roon can really make these what feel like very, very sort of sensitive recommendations and logical recommendations. It's not just like, hey, here's 50 things you might like. You're kind of led by the hand a little bit based on your own taste. So I think that's been a huge area of growth for us, and one that's really been noted. The other one would be that when we launched Roon, the only way to play audio from Roon was, to run Roon on a PC, for example, and use a USB DAC. Or I think we had AirPlay support when we first launched. So the other sort of parallel initiative has been what I touched on earlier, to support more and more audio devices using different types of protocols. In the time since 2016, we've launched the Roon Ready program, where we work with manufacturers they actually embed Roon software in their devices. And we work with them to certify those devices so that you turn on a Roon Ready. Could be a network's powered speaker. It could be a streaming integrated amp. It could be any kind of device that can take audio from the network. And Roon will just identify it and configure itself to work appropriately with that device. So it becomes this very sort of, it's a very easy to set up experience. There's no complexity. What we were trying to solve was, early on in the sort of the computer audiophile days, there was quite a lot of sort of manual configuration and tweaking that had to be done, getting your software to work with your hardware. And we really just wanted to do away with that, because it's not really a fun process. It's we
Right.
thought of it, that's more of a speed bump to people actually getting the most out of their equipment, having the best possible experience. So Roon has really tried to kind of remove that from the equation. You just plug in your hardware, Roon sees it, and off you go. So I think those are the two big areas. I mean, now there's almost not an audio device that you can buy at this point that doesn't work with Roon in some way. So that's obviously a big change in that time.
Well, and I can definitely attest to the ease of use of Roon. I mean, I use it almost every day, and just for streaming music, it's just fantastic. Even if you don't dive into all of the additional features, we talked a little bit about how feature rich Roon is, but that is where I want to go next. I want to hear about, and this is honestly for me, as well as probably some of the people that are listening today. Tell us about a feature that is underutilized in Roon, or a feature that people may not know about, because I know it does go pretty deep in some of the things that you can configure and ways that you can use Roon.
It does. It does. I think there's one feature that I think most of us on the team think of it as being Roon's secret weapon, but it's maybe not the most trivial to use. It's not. So maybe it does get a little bit underutilized. It's a feature that we call focus. What this is basically when you're browsing in Roon, let's say I'm looking at an artist's discography, for example. I could look at an artist with a huge discography. I was actually just looking earlier. I was looking at Ozzy Osbourne. And so I'm looking at hundreds of records that he's performed on. I could say, for example, I'd like to see just his solo albums, or albums where he played with Black Sabbath, or albums where Zakk Wylde played guitar with Ozzy on releases that are available in high-res audio. So we can do this sort of multi-dimensional filter, is technically what it's called. But basically, it's designed to work the way you think as a music lover. I'm looking for, this sonata by that composer performed by this orchestra with that conductor. That's something that's very, very hard to find using traditional search. But with Focus, it's basically just a list. You've got a list of conductors and a list of orchestras and a list of whatever it is, record labels, and you just basically toggle them on and off. And you can narrow down a collection of thousands of albums down to just a handful, which makes them very, very easy to browse. So it's a pretty nerdy feature, but for the music fan, we think it's indispensable.
Well, and particularly for the artist that the discography is just massive. I mean, you can just absolutely get overwhelmed looking for something very specific. So yeah, no, I like that. I'm gonna go play with that later today myself. That's terrific. Well, tell us a little bit. You've kind of brought us up to date. Take us into the future a little bit and tell us, what you guys are working on. What might we experience from Roon a year or 2 years from now?
Okay. Well, I think Roon, it's been a really interesting experience because when we launched the product, we were a very small team, and our initial user base was very small, and it was pretty easy to predict what people wanted out of Roon. And in the beginning, we've always tried to keep up with customer demand. When people want a feature, we really try to be responsive and build the things that people are asking for. In the beginning, that was very easy to do because they were quite focused. In the beginning, it was very specific audio questions. We need DSD support. We need support for ASIO drivers on Mac or whatever the features were. But over time, the types of people that use Roon, it's become sort of a broader market. You've got your sort of dyed-in-the-wool audiophiles. You have a really vibrant DIY community that's building all their own Roon components, and in some cases, even writing software that talks back to Roon via an API. I mean, incredible stuff. And then you have people who are using Roon with home control systems. And what you find is that each of these groups has their own needs. So Roon is becoming broader. For a single user, they may perceive it as being the same thing it's always been, but in fact, its capabilities are always growing to accommodate all these different types of use cases. I mean, we've talked quite a lot about Roon is very much a home product today. So you run it on a device in your home, whether that's a PC or a NAS or our Nucleus server or another Linux appliance, and then you play back the audio on devices around your home. That's what Roon is for today. But obviously, in the modern world, there's an expectation that you'll be able to take that experience and take it with you on your phone when you leave the home. And that's not something that Roon has historically done. But I think over time, it's safe to say that we're moving in the direction where we want to be able to give you that Roon experience wherever you are, whether you're at the office or at the gym or on vacation or whatever. So it's not so strictly tied to the home. That's the general direction that we're moving in. Yeah, I think that's probably, obviously we'll keep expanding in the area that we have been expanding in terms of device support. We're always working with more manufacturers. Right now, there's a few hundred that we're collaborating with to make sure their devices are certified. And the other thing that I would say is that we find quite interesting is when we launched, Tidal was the only streaming service that had even CD quality, let alone high res. Obviously, there are more streaming services becoming available, and some of them are cater to very specific needs. It could be in a specific country where there isn't coverage from Tidal or Qobuz or one of the services that we have integrated today. So I think we expect to be integrating more streaming services over time, just to be able to reach more people and to give more people access to high-res streaming. I think those are probably the big themes as far as where we're going in the next year or two.
Well, and that does tie into one more question I just thought of that I wanted to ask you. And it really, Roon is not like an amplifier, right? It's not just a product. You build it, it's done, the design's done, you put it out, it's a piece of hardware, and you just going about your business. And that thing would be the same 10 years from now as it was when you created it. It's constantly evolving. So I wanted to give you a chance to give a shout out to your team. You guys, I mean, for something that is constantly changing, and the streaming services are changing, and the music is changing. I mean, there's new music every day. So how do you guys, as a team, keep Roon up to date and on the cutting edge and relevant?
It is. It's quite an effort. The team has grown dramatically. I think when we started, we were 7 or 8 people. I think now we're about 60. The team is all over the world. You know, Actually, during COVID, we had the stroke of luck for us being able to grow the team and hire people from all over the place. The fact that we don't have a central location and we're an all remote company is really cool, because when we're hiring someone, whether that's a QA engineer or it's a software developer or it's a customer success person, we don't, we can, it doesn't matter where they live. So we can find the people who also love music in addition to that thing that they do, which is really unusual. to have a whole software development team, all of whom are rabid music fans, is not something that you can typically get to do. So we've been very, very fortunate in that respect. We're by being all remote, where everyone on the team is extremely passionate. We have people from every department writing on our blog about their favorite albums and their favorite tracks. It's not something you typically see at a company that you would think would be a technology company and engineering driven. It's a really passionate bunch. It's really great to work with this team.
Well, and in that respect, Roon Labs is similar to SoundStage. SoundStage is exactly the same. We have writers, literally all over the world, staff all over the world. We don't have a central location. So you're speaking my language with that type of company structure. I definitely understand it. Well, Enno, thank you so much. I really do feel like you gave us a great update on Roon Labs and the Roon software. And it's terrific because later on today I'm going to go experiment with that focus feature in my own
Cool.
system a little bit. But thank you
Excellent.
so much. I really appreciate your time, and let's check in again pretty soon.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me. This is great fun.
All right. Bye bye.
Take care. Bye bye.